She doesn't respect you less because you're not enough. She respects you less because you showed her she doesn't have to. I need to say something that most women will never say to a man's face, because we don't want to be cruel, and honestly, we don't always understand it ourselves while it's happening. There are specific things men do, kind things, well-intentioned things, things that every piece of mainstream relationship advice would call good communication, that quietly, steadily erode the respect a woman has for them. Not because women are ungrateful, not because kindness is wrong, but because there is a difference, a very specific, very real difference, between a man who is kind because he has self-respect and a man who is kind because he's afraid of losing you. Women feel that difference. We may not be able to name it, but we feel it. And when we feel it, something shifts. Quietly, slowly, in a way that is very hard to reverse once it's gone. Today I'm going to show you exactly what those behaviors are, because I've watched men I genuinely liked lose my respect through these exact patterns, and I've always wished I could have told them before it was too late. Consider this that conversation. I want to tell you about a man named Elliot. Elliot was, by almost every measure, an excellent partner. He was thoughtful. He remembered details, her favorite coffee order, her sister's name, the name of the project she was stressed about at work. He texted back within minutes, always. He rearranged plans when she needed flexibility. He apologized quickly, sometimes for things that hadn't really been his fault, because he hated conflict and genuinely didn't want her to feel bad. He would have done almost anything to keep her happy. And that, right there, was the problem he never saw coming. The woman he was with, her name was Priya, had been genuinely excited about Elliot in the beginning. He was warm and attentive and present in a way that felt refreshing at first. But about 5 months in, something had started to shift in how she saw him. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. She still cared about him, but somewhere along the way, her level of desire had quietly dimmed. She found herself slightly less interested in his opinions, slightly more irritated by small things, slightly less excited when his name appeared on her phone. And here is what I want you to sit with for a moment. Elliot had not done anything wrong. He had not cheated, lied, or been cruel. He had shown up, consistently and warmly, for every moment of that relationship. He did everything right, and lost her respect anyway. When Priya eventually ended things, she said something she didn't fully understand herself. "I just feel like I don't know who you are anymore." Elliot was devastated. He'd given her everything. What he didn't understand, what I want to spend this entire video helping you understand, is that the very things he gave her were the things that quietly cost him her respect. To understand what happened to Elliot, you need to understand something about how respect actually forms and what erodes it in intimate relationships. In social psychology, there's a concept around how in close relationships, the degree to which each person maintains a separate, distinct identity directly affects how much they are valued by the other person. When one person dissolves their identity into the relationship, when their preferences, opinions, and emotional states become increasingly governed by the other person's reactions, it triggers a very specific psychological response in the partner. That response is not gratitude, it is not comfort. It is a loss of respect that happens almost automatically, through a deep recognition that the person across from you no longer has enough internal structure to hold their own ground. Dissolution is not devotion, and women know the difference. Here's the evolutionary basis for why this happens. Throughout human history, a man's ability to hold his own position under social pressure was a direct signal of his competence and reliability. A man who immediately changed his position based on his partner's displeasure, who rearranged his preferences to match hers, who apologized reflexively to avoid any discomfort, was communicating at a deep level that he was not someone who could be counted on to hold ground when it genuinely mattered. And a woman's nervous system still reads this signal. When Elliot rearranged plans without being asked, apologized for things that weren't his fault, immediately agreed with things he didn't actually agree with, Priya's nervous system was registering each of those moments, not consciously, not critically, but accumulating data. Each small surrender is a data point. They add up to a conclusion. And the conclusion her nervous system reached was, This man does not have enough self-structure to be a reliable anchor. And when that conclusion settles in, even quietly, even half-consciously, respect begins to drain. Because you cannot fully respect something that shapes itself entirely to you. I want to be precise here. I am not telling you to be difficult. I am not telling you to create conflict deliberately or manufacture disagreement to seem more interesting. What I am telling you is this: a man who has genuine self-respect is a completely different experience to be in a relationship with than a man who is performing accommodation to avoid loss. The first is warm and caring and giving because he has enough inside himself to give from abundance. The second is warm and caring and giving because he is afraid of what happens if he stops. She can feel which one you are, every time. Let me show you Elliot's pattern in detail, and then show you what it looks like when a man handles the same moments from a place of genuine self-respect. Elliot's pattern showed up in small moments, not dramatic ones. When Priya said she wanted to try a new restaurant, and he'd been looking forward to the place they'd already booked, he immediately said, "Absolutely, whatever you prefer." Not because he genuinely didn't mind, because he was monitoring her mood and adjusting to it in real time. When she made a comment that was slightly critical of something he cared about, his taste in music, a decision he'd made at work, he immediately softened his position, offered caveats, found ways to agree with her even when he didn't. When they had a disagreement, even a minor one, Elliot would apologize within hours, regardless of how the disagreement had actually gone. Not because he had genuinely reflected and found he was wrong, but because the unresolved tension felt unbearable to him, and apologizing made it stop. He wasn't being kind, he was managing his anxiety, and she knew. Each one of these moments, taken alone, seems entirely reasonable, even admirable: flexibility, sensitivity, conflict resolution. But the pattern they formed, the aggregate message they sent, was consistent and clear. Elliot's inner world was organized primarily around Priya's reactions. Her mood set his mood. Her approval settled him. Her disapproval destabilized him. And Priya began to feel a kind of low-level restlessness in his presence, like something that should be there, some resistance, some weight, some sense of a person pushing back against the world, was missing. Now let me show you a man who was in almost the same situation, but navigated it completely differently. His name was Kwame. He'd been seeing a woman named Sasha for about 4 months. Sasha was direct, sometimes bluntly so. She had strong opinions. She pushed back on things. One evening, she disagreed strongly with something Kwame had said about a mutual friend. It wasn't a huge thing, but she stated her disagreement with some force. Kwame listened. Actually listened. He thought about it. And then he said, "I hear you. I actually still think I'm right about this, but I understand why you see it that way. We might just have to disagree on this one." No apology, no immediate pivot to her position, no anxiety in his voice. Sasha told me later that that single moment made her feel something she hadn't expected to feel. Safer. A man who holds his ground is a man she can lean on. Not because she agreed with him, not because she liked losing the argument, but because in that moment she registered, there is a real person here, someone with an actual interior, someone I cannot simply reshape with my mood. And that deepened her respect for Kwame in a way that 6 months of Elliot's accommodation had steadily drained it from him. Now let me give you the 4 specific behaviors. These are the things that most consistently erode a woman's respect. Quietly, invisibly, often without anyone realizing what's happening until the damage is already done. The first is over-explaining your choices to her. Not explaining, over-explaining. There is a difference. Explaining is, "I can't make it Saturday. I have something I've committed to." That's communication. That's respectful and clear. Over-explaining is adding 3 more sentences of justification after that. Every layer beyond the first communicates the same thing. I need you to approve of this decision. I am not secure enough in my own judgment to simply make it and stand behind it. The man who respects himself says what he needs to say once, clearly. with warmth where appropriate. And then he doesn't pad it with reassurance requests disguised as explanation. Women stop respecting men who over-explain because it signals that the man's choices are provisional, pending her approval. The second behavior is rearranging yourself to avoid her displeasure. This is the Elliot pattern in its most recognizable form. Changing plans you genuinely wanted without being asked. Softening opinions the moment she signals disagreement. Shifting your mood immediately when hers shifts. A woman's mild displeasure is not an emergency. It is not something that requires immediate corrective action on your part. People who care about each other disagree sometimes. Plans don't always align. A man who treats every instance of his partner's mild dissatisfaction as a problem he must immediately solve has outsourced control of his own behavior to her emotional state. Her mood is not a command. It is information. A distinction that matters is between genuine generosity, which comes from having enough of yourself to give, and anxious accommodation, which comes from being unable to tolerate her unhappiness even briefly. Genuine generosity makes her feel good. Anxious accommodation makes her feel quietly contemptuous. The third behavior is apologizing reflexively, not because you've done something wrong, but because the discomfort of unresolved tension is unbearable to you. There is a very important distinction between an apology that comes from genuine reflection and an apology that is really a conflict resolution tactic. The second kind sounds like accountability. It is not. It is anxiety management. And a woman can feel the difference. When a man apologizes before he's genuinely had time to reflect, or apologizes for positions he actually still holds, or apologizes simply because the tension has become unbearable, it does not register as emotional maturity. It registers as emotional fragility. A reflexive apology is not humility. It's a bid for comfort. The man who respects himself apologizes when he has genuinely done something worth apologizing for. He is capable of sitting with unresolved tension for long enough to actually understand what happened. He does not use "I'm sorry" as a way to make the discomfort stop. The fourth behavior is the hardest to name but the most important, the absence of any line she cannot move. Every person in a relationship, consciously or not, tests where the limits are, not necessarily out of manipulation, but out of the same instinct that causes a child to push against boundaries, to find out whether there is actually something solid there. When a woman pushes against a man's limits, asks for something unreasonable, crosses a line she's been shown, and he simply absorbs it, adjusts around it, or quietly accepts it to avoid conflict, she registers something very important. There is no floor here. A man with no standards is a man she cannot fully respect. I want to be very honest about this from the female perspective. A man without enforced limits does not feel safe to a woman, not because she wants to be controlled, but because a man who cannot hold a boundary with her cannot hold one for her either, cannot protect what is his, cannot be counted on to stand firm when it actually matters. This doesn't mean rigidity. It means that there are things that matter to you, your time, your energy, your self-respect, that are not infinitely negotiable, and that you will say so, calmly and clearly, when those things are disregarded. That kind of man, warm, caring, and yet in possession of a real standard, is the man a woman can build genuine respect for. Before I close, 3 things I need you to hear alongside everything else. First, the goal is not to become cold, withholding, or emotionally unavailable. I have watched men hear advice like this and swing to the opposite extreme, suddenly becoming non-communicative, treating every expression of need as weakness, manufacturing an aloofness that is just as unattractive as the over-accommodation it was meant to replace. The antidote to people-pleasing is not indifference. It's self-possession. A man with genuine self-respect is still warm, still generous, still emotionally present. The difference is the source. He gives from fullness, not from fear. Second, this applies to how you treat yourself, not just how you manage her. The behaviors I've described are symptoms of something deeper. A man who has not fully settled into his own identity, his own value, his own sense of what he deserves. That settling cannot be faked. It comes from time spent investing in yourself, your work, your health, your relationships, your inner life, until you are someone you would respect if you met yourself. When you are that person, the behaviors I've described largely take care of themselves. Third, if you recognize yourself in Elliot's pattern, this is not a reason for shame. Elliot was not broken. He was not weak. He was a man who cared deeply and expressed it in the only way he'd been taught. Most men who fall into this pattern do so because they were never shown any different. What matters is not how long you've been doing it. What matters is whether you decide from today to build something different. Elliot gave Priya everything he had to give. He woke up every morning deciding to be a good partner, and he went to bed every night believing he had been. And he had been, by one definition. But the version of goodness he was offering her, the kind that constantly monitored her reactions, that shaped itself around her preferences, that apologized before it had finished thinking, was not the kind that builds lasting respect. Because here's the truth I wish someone had told Elliot before it was too late. Priya didn't need a man who would give her everything. She needed a man who had something of his own, something she couldn't take from him. Something that existed before she arrived and would exist after she left. A sense of self that was not a reflection of her approval, but a thing with its own weight, its own texture, its own quiet certainty. She can only respect what she cannot fully move. That man, the one who is kind without being controlled, who is warm without being desperate, who can sit in conflict without immediately collapsing it. That man does not have to earn her respect. He simply has it. Build that man. Not for her, because you deserve to be him. Drop a comment below. Tell me which of the 4 behaviors you recognized in yourself. Be honest. No judgment here. I read everything, and that kind of honesty is where real change begins. If this video gave you something worth keeping, subscribe. 3 times a week, I come back here with something most women would never say out loud. But I will. Next video. 7 signs you are more attractive than you think. Because before we talk about becoming more, I want to show you what's already there that you've been overlooking. That one is going to feel different. I'll see you then.